Good evening and welcome to Enemy Within on peoplesinternetradio.com. It's Friday the 13th of November. We've got no Trisky decaphobics out there because tonight we've got an absolutely amazing guest lined up for you. We've got the legend that is Rick Simpson. Now, Rick has done numerous radio interviews before, and I hope we're going to be able to explore some different avenues to what the standard interview is. Good evening, Rick. How you doing, man?
Good evening, brother. I'm really happy to be with you. You know, I mean, we're here to get the truth out, and I hope we can do that in the next 2 hours.
That's what we're all about, and we've got Tom Barnes and Tony Hurst with us as well. And Tony, I know, has been doing a lot of research ever since we first heard that we'd got Rick lined up. And I'd like to say a big thank you to Babs in the chat room for sorting this out for us. Tony, would you like to kick the ball off, please?
Well, yeah, first of all, evening, Rick. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us here. It's an absolute pleasure to meet you and be able to talk to you. I've gone through the frustration of trying to get certain things out over the last couple of years that I've come across certain different ways of thinking about the legalisation campaign, and I've really been looking forward to an opportunity to talk to somebody like yourself. Well, I didn't think that I'd get the opportunity to talk to somebody with the status that you've got and the respect that you've earned for the sacrifices that you've made in the last 20 years, because I know you have made a lot of sacrifices as well. I struggle to find an example of anybody that has made more in the way of a sacrifice in what they've given. In terms of, you've just completely changed your life to get out this message that you just simply want to help people to help themselves. And I think that's a very strong message, and something that we could take great pride in doing together, all of us, in getting that message out there that it is possible to heal yourself. So first off is a big round of applause for all of that sacrifice.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, brother. But, you know, I want the public to understand something. You know, I'm just an ordinary man, you know, and, you know, I really consider myself just to be simply the messenger. You know, it's the oil that works all these wonderful, you know, miracles. And, I just think it's such a shame that we live in a world, you know, that is so ignorant to this subject, you know, that, you know, and so many people are suffering and dying all over the planet for no reason other than greed. You know, no one ever had the right to outlaw cannabis in the first place. I mean, we grew this plant for thousands of years with no regulations or restrictions of any kind. So I'm not out just for legalization. I want total repeal of these laws in every country on this planet. Let's get rid of this nonsense. I mean, they're all based on corruption anyway. You know, we need to get back to reality, and we need to start helping people. And this is a message I'm sending to our governments.
I'm in total agreement with you, and there's a lot of people out there fighting different causes that are fighting legislation. And one of the important things that I'd like to try and get out, I know you do know quite a bit about Freeman business, and we're not advocating that here. I know that you're well aware that governments aren't really running the show, that they're having their strings pulled by big pharma and banks and whatever. And the legislation is our sticking point. People are fighting against that, and there's no real need to. If we all knew exactly who and what we are, and the power that we have as a man or a woman, and not a legal person, then these statutes and acts and legislations would not apply to us. So what I'm telling you is, as a man, I can do whatever I want with this plant, but as a legal person, I'm bound by legislation, and therefore we're fighting the wrong battle. We need to be fighting the battle for our freedom to do exactly what it is that we want to do with our bodies and with any plant that we like on this planet. That's the battle. A battle for our own sovereignty, the right to choose what we do. And I think if we can get this across to more people on a wider platform, then we've got an awfully greater chance of bringing down or stopping, because bringing down and destroying is not really my game with anything. Changing what we've got would be a much better idea to work for us rather than against us. Now, I don't just believe it. I know that it's possible because the legislation is there by consent. And if we don't consent to this legislation, then we don't have to abide by it. And I think this is the big picture that a lot of people are missing. I don't know if you've got any views on that.
Well, I certainly do. I mean, our whole justice system, basically in North America and England, like we should get back to what real law is, and that's common law.
Yep.
What we see in our courts, in North America and England, that's not real justice. It's just nonsense. And it's like you say, it's these big money people, especially the big bankers, Rothschilds, Rockefellers, that gang.
Yep.
They're the ones that are really running the show, from the shadows, and they control basically all our governments.
Yep.
Our governments are not representing the people, they're representing the interests of big money. And these are the same people that, basically have a huge amount of shares in the pharmaceutical industry and the oil industry and all these other, things that are harming our planet.
Yeah.
So, in my opinion, as far as I'm concerned, it's just simply a matter of people realizing this and seeing it for what it is, because, they're killing this planet. Everywhere I look, it's like Fukushima, Gulf oil spill, and this is poisoning our planet more and more every day, and it's compromising our immune systems, because we're not, we're just not designed to live in this type of world.
Yeah.
And it's just like these people are doing this knowingly. And I'm sure they are, because, we use this plant extensively throughout history. It was man's best friend, for God's sakes. And today, the way I look at it, it provides us with the only rational answer to both our health needs and practically everything else. Our fuel, food supplies, over 50,000 different things can be produced from cannabis. Practically everything we use in our day-to-day lives can be produced from earth-friendly, sustainable cannabis. We put people back on the land. I think basically we could put an end to unemployment and switch all of these ugly industries that are killing the planet, switch them over to earth-friendly hemp-based industries. We could solve all these problems in no time if we would just simply start using, our common sense. And that seems to be something that's badly lacking these days, brother.
Yep. I think, it's deliberately, I don't think it's lacking. I think they're well aware of all of this, those that pull the strings, and they deliberately don't want us to have it because it frees us from the chains of their commercial corporate world, especially with Big Pharma. But you can take it down, can't you, right to all the materials you mentioned. Who wants to lose their monopolies that they've spent, hundreds of years in some cases building up? But getting back to the people that you're saying there that are really running the show, one of my biggest concerns, and the thing that put me onto the track that I went down with my little bit of research that I did in the legalisation campaign, is the funding that's come from George Soros for this campaign, and the weight that he's put behind it. And that made me seriously suspicious about what this was all about, and made me start digging further. And I think what I found is that the route to legalisation that is being so embraced is actually the route to a honeypot situation, where we've got genetically modified seeds that we've got plenty of proof for can be patented, because Monsanto and the other companies like them have been doing it for a long time now with the full backing of the government. In fact, they're kind of like another arm of the government now. They've got their own laws written for them and their own people there in the American government and the FDA. So that they're really like an extension of that. And we know that they've patented cotton, we know that they've patented wheat, and I could go on for half an hour about what they've managed to patent, and they've managed to destroy farms and farmers through having these seeds on their land. So we've got some precedents to go on. And I remember you was on with Martin Farrell a fortnight ago here on People's Internet Radio, great stuff on there, and you were saying about Monsanto. You've heard that they've got an involvement in Uruguay, which again is all funded by George Soros.
Mm-hmm.
And So when you put these things together, I can see this different situation. We've got the people embracing it. They're coming out of the woodwork. Many of these people that live in America and Canada, other countries as well where this is happening, have spent most of their lives hiding from the system. They've been out of everything because what they do is not compatible with normal living. And now, because they've got this legal route that they can go down to get this medicine, they're coming out of the woodwork and they're giving up their biometric data, their DNA, their details about their family and their jobs, their income and everything else. They're willingly giving this all of this up and entering into a system that equates to me to a big data database. And this system can be extremely dangerous to these people. It can be dangerous in ways that most of them haven't thought about. For example, if you put yourself on one of those lists, it's been known for that to trigger social services or the likes of in whatever country to come and attempt or to take your children away from you because you're a drug user in your home. It's done the same for people driving. It's affected people's jobs. And this is just the early signs of what it is. For me, there's a bigger picture here. There's something more going on. It's about how they can circumnavigate this situation, bring it round to a full control situation, which is why I think it was done in bits and pieces and over time in an experimental way. So, and I could rattle on about this for a while, but I'll give you a chance to jump in before you forget some of that.
Oh no, I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, it's all about control. And these people have no right to control this plant. I mean, cannabis is a God-given plant. It states right in our Bible that we have the right to use these plants, to our best advantage. And, who do these people think they are? I would like to see the man stand in front of me who thinks he has the right to tell me that I can't grow this plant and use it medicinally. Yeah. I mean, it's just absurd that anybody could even think this way. So, to be truthful, what I see happening right now, it is truly a horror story. In my mind, I look at cannabis for what it is. It's a farm crop. And if you grew it on a grand scale, you should be able to buy a kilo of good cannabis, medicinal bud for about $10. It's just these absurd regulations that these corrupted governments have put in place that's caused this black market. And then they villainized it, the deadly, dangerous marijuana. Well, marijuana is not a drug. First off, it's just a plant. It's just resinous medicinal strains of cannabis. That's what they call marijuana. But that's the word they use to villainize it. So I would, I prefer to call it hemp or cannabis hemp, of course. But, what I see happening, especially in the United States, it's just a madhouse over there. They're all running in different directions. They're all producing the Rick Simpson oil. And I have nothing to do with any of these people. Some of them are claiming that I'm directly affiliated with their operations. Some of them are even claiming that they're me. And this is going on, and I get emails all the time. I purchased your oil, from some dispensary or some dealer somewhere, and it doesn't have the effects that you describe. Well, then I got the unpleasant task then of telling them that, they've been robbed. And this is happening all the time. There's the Phoenix Tears Foundation. I have no affiliation with them. And there's even a Rick Simpson Cancer Foundation. And I'm not connected to any of this. So all of these people are just using my name to try to, bring in donations and money whatever way they can. And often, many of these suppliers, I hate to slam the good ones because there are people out there who truly, do try to supply the most medicinal oil possible. But for every one of them, you'll find about 10 scam artists. And they're just robbing people left and right. And see, to me, this was never what this was about anyway. What I did when I put up the Phoenix Tears website back in 2004, I just wanted people to know this is how simple it is, so you can help yourself and heal yourself. We gave them the dosage instructions. We told them what, type of cannabis that they should be using, the strong sedative indica strains. And now, a vast number of people worldwide have acted on that information, and they've had wonderful results. But, it's like you say, in the future, what these governments, see, they're working with the big money to try to regulate this and control it. And they want to use it as, just as you said, a cash cow. But this is ridiculous. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, what we should be doing, we should be taking the money away from these rich and powerful people that are literally killing us and killing the planet. What I say is take them into a common law court, make them admit their guilt, because, it's obvious that they are. All of their resources and money that these people have, they're the proceeds of crime. Crimes they've committed against us. Now, if I rob a bank, I don't get to keep the money, do I? And if we leave these people in charge, we'll never get this world straightened out. I think it's time, really, for a world government, but not the New World Order variety, but a world council with representatives from every region, sitting on a big panel and open book policy to the public. Nothing more hidden. We deserve to know the truth, don't we? We're paying their salaries. So if they take these resources and the money and everything that, Rothschilds and people like that have, and distribute it equally all over the world, help everybody everywhere, we could make this world a better place. And then start growing cannabis, and use it in every conceivable way. And let's clean up this planet. Let's save this earth, because honestly, at the rate they're poisoning this planet, I think in a very short time we could wind up going extinct. And I'm just afraid that we'll pass the point of no return before people react. This is like the frog in the cold water, and then you turn the heat on, and the water gets hotter and hotter, and the frog don't even know it.
Yeah.
And it's basically the same thing going on. There's so many people have their lives tied to these jobs and things. But as far as I'm concerned, if you work in any industry that's harming, your fellow man, then that's just a fool's game. And, I think people should just wake up and realize, that there's no future for their children or their grandchildren. Look what we're leaving them. So I honestly believe it's our responsibility, as human beings to unite and with one voice, just tell these governments, tell them all, look, we've had enough of this nonsense. Get out of our way. I have the right to grow it, you have the right to grow it, and anybody does. Because it's the only, this is a wonderful preventative medicine too. If I had a young child, I'd be giving that child oil every day. Because, that could protect the child from ever getting cancer, diabetes, so many of these horrible diseases can be prevented. And this is the most wonderful preventative medicine on the planet. It's perfectly safe, harmless, non-addictive. What more could you ask for? But when you look today when you look at the pharmaceutical industry, that's nothing but a bad joke. There are chemicals and poisons, and mix them and put them in pills and feed everybody these pills. Well, this is what they've been doing now for decades. And on top of that, chemotherapy and radiation and CAT scans. These are all harmful, for God's sakes. And anybody that knows when you look at the basis of medicine, which I believe is called the Hippocratic Oath, and right there in the oath it states, first do no harm. And as a doctor, I shall not administer poison. Now, what are these people, these doctors today, what do they think they're doing? I know the doctors have an excuse because the governments are the ones that put these crazy regulations in place that basically do not permit them to step outside the box and use treatments that are much less harmless and much more effective. They're kept down by these regulations the government's put in place. So, I think it's time that, the governments grew up, because there's no hiding from this now. It's on the horizon, this medicine's coming. And the thing is today too, so many of us just don't have much of an income. There's a great deal of poor people on this planet, and they simply don't have the money to play these pharmaceutical games. Because if the pharmaceutical industry is involved with this, they're going to want a fortune for these treatments. So the poor people just can't do that. So the poor people are going to go out, and that's the vast majority of us, and I think they're just going to grow their own cannabis and make their own medicine. What are they going to do? Put us all in jail? So I think this is the only solution. Unite as one, and let's change this world and make it into a much better place than it is at present.
Well, yeah, I agree with all that. There's a lot going on there to get back through, seeds was one thing that I wanted to get back to, but I'm definitely in agreement with where we are with the global situation. It's a lot bigger than just cannabis. It's everything. It's all revolves around this smoke screen that is legality and people's lacking of understanding of legality and legislation. If we can clear that up, everything else you mentioned can get cleared up pretty quick, believe it or not. I know people find it hard to believe. I did when I first heard about how it actually works. I thought it can't be that simple, but actually it is. No man or woman has authority over you unless you've caused some harm. And the only people here that are causing harm are those that are denying people their medicine. That is the reality of our situation.
You're quite right, brother. I mean, back in 2003, when I really stumbled onto this and cured my own cancer, before I actually, applied the oil, I almost didn't do it because I thought, surely, if there was a natural medicine out there that worked to kill cancer, then our medical systems would be using it. And this is what we all tend to believe. I couldn't believe they would hold something like this back because they've been telling us forever that we have to find a cure for cancer and all these other horrible diseases like AIDS, MS. It goes on and on and on. This isn't not just effective on cancer. This medication is effective on everything if it's made properly. So, I was just shocked. And, it was a very disillusioning experience for me, because when you live in a country all your life, and you're proud, I was always proud to call myself a Canadian. But after I seen the way the government and the legal system and medical system there were run, it just disgusted me. And it changed my whole life. And actually, that's the reason I'm in Europe now, because, I can go back to Canada any time. There's no police agencies looking for me. But I really don't feel comfortable in my own country anymore. And I found Europe to be much more open-minded. Things are so much different here. I honestly have to say that I feel that the United States and Canada, they're backwards. The ignorance they've bred there with all that propaganda, it's pounded into people's heads. Cannabis is harmful in some way. Well, I've been doing research into this now for well over a decade, and many friends of mine, very well-educated people, have been doing the same. And we have never found one thing about that plant that is detrimental in any way. So, everything they told us was nothing but a pack of lies, right from the get-go. And the only thing that concerns me with the use of cannabis, I always tell people that these extracts must be produced from the sedative indica strains because they promote the sleep and rest that help us, heal. But there's a lot of people out there trying to make oil from sativa strains. And sativas are very energizing. Now, I've talked to, I've always, stayed away from giving patients sativas because I do not want to see a terminal cancer patient bouncing off the walls because that's basically what a strong sativa can do. So, I've always warned people to stay away from it. But, for external use, an extract made from sativas will work just fine. Skin cancer, psoriasis, diabetic ulcer, severe burns, that type of thing. But any oil you ingest, as far as I'm concerned, it basically should be a strong indica variety because that's what gives you the medicinal effects you need. And I start people off with little tiny doses of this. Just a little speck on their finger 3 times a day. And, after 4 days, you're increasing your dose, go another 4 days and increase again. And usually if you do that, within about a month, you can get up to the point where you can ingest 1/3 of a gram or 1/3 of a mil every 8 hours. And I've had people that have gone through this, using this method, and they swore to me that they didn't feel that they even got high. So, this gives them the time to build up their tolerance, for this medication. And once you've done that, a lot of these cancer patients, terminal patients, they go back to work after a month because I tell them to take a month off. Just to relax and, get control of their disease. But when they go back to work, others that work with them don't even know that they're using it. And I always tell them in the beginning that, you have to be aware of the fact that basically for probably the first 3 weeks, you're going to spend most of your time sleeping because this is the effect that these extracts have. I also warn people, not to drive their cars. Well, not just for a short time until they get the feel of this medicine. Because, this medication does not impair your motor skills. It's not like alcohol, or it's not like any of the pharmaceuticals. And matter of fact, in the U.S. now, these states that have legalized, they're finding their accident rates have dropped by about 10%. What does that tell you?
Tells us we're more careful as stunt drivers. But
right.
And getting back,
that's exactly what they found.
Yep. Getting back to what you're saying there about dosage, I can relate to that. I've got good experience with consuming, and I've said to people for many years that just smoke casually, and anyone that's got a problem with that, you should think about this maybe. Stress is one of the biggest killers out there. Most people suffer from it one way or another, and smoking cannabis does help greatly to reduce stress, so therefore it must have some medical benefit. Certainly has in my life when it comes to stress.
But, it does, brother. It does. I mean, well, they've proven now, from what I understand, if you're a cannabis smoker, you have 62% less chance of getting lung cancer. And it's a known fact that even smoking cannabis can have an effect on blood sugar levels and things of that nature. So no one can say, I mean, all forms of cannabis, smoking, ingesting, whatever, putting it on topically, it's all medicinal. But smoking happens to be the least medicinal. That's the only problem with it. But I've always said that basically, I hate to even call this medication a drug. I've said many times that I consider it to be a medicine that can be used with good effect, even recreationally. You're not hurting anyone. You're not hurting yourself. Look at people who go out and drink or take all these pharmaceuticals, and they get up in the morning, they're all groggy and messed up, or they got a big hangover. Well, when you get up the next morning after smoking cannabis, you don't have none of those effects. It's nothing but friendly to us.
Yep.
And, we're designed, basically, we all have an endocannabinoid system, all animal life, dogs, cats, horses, they all have the same system. So it's basically like life on this planet was designed to use this medicine. So how dare they hold this back? I mean, this just defies comprehension to me. And, I've been at this now since 2003. And like you said earlier, I've done, hundreds and hundreds of interviews and lectures and things like that with some of the top experts in the world. And they're all singing the same song. Basically legalize this. Let's just stop this nonsense. But the trouble is the governments aren't listening because they're listening to the people that really control them, and that's the big money. And they don't want that. But, I agree with you. There is something else going on here because, I think they realize now that, the planet is dying and that they have to do something. But as you said, they still wish to remain in control. And if humanity is ever to know freedom, we cannot allow that to take place.
Can I just jump in, Tony? Earlier, Rick, you were talking about the propaganda, and I think that's the biggest obstacle that we need to get past. The mainstream media propaganda and demonization of cannabis. That's the biggest tool that governments use to demonize cannabis and force a legislation through. In the UK, we had a time when it was downgraded from Class B to a Class C. And then as soon as that happened, we had article after article in all the mainstream press saying people were going crazy, people were jumping out of windows. If you look back on Google, I've mentioned it so many times on this show, you can look back on Google and look for first death of cannabis, and you get one every year from our media saying first death from cannabis. Well, you've reported this 5 times already, so it can't be the first, but there's never been the first. There's never been anybody died in thousands of years, but I think that's the biggest obstacle that we need to get past is the propaganda in the mainstream press. But that's what we try to do with shows like this, is talk to people like you and get the real story out.
Well, they send the message, that cannabis is dangerous. Keep your children away from it. This is so ridiculous. I was speaking at the World Hemp Congress in 2012 in Slovenia, and there was 4 or 5 other people there speaking about medicinal use too. And we had this gentleman, he went on the stage and he started going on about, cannabis children should never be allowed to have cannabis. And I was just shocked, to me, because it's the greatest medicine on the planet and it's the safest medicine. And when you look at, what these doctors give our children, that's a rather scary topic, believe me.
Yeah, fluoride, mercury, all the rest of it they're giving kids.
Oh, yeah. So when he was done, and during the question period, I got up and I told him, I said, what's going on here? I said, show me the danger. And he said, well, he just tried to sidestep it. Well, it's been proven scientifically, blah, blah, blah. And when he came down off that stage, I followed him right outside. And I said to him, okay. I said, you know who I am. Now I want you to tell me, where's the harm? And he looked at me and he said, well, you're from Canada. And I said, well, what's that got to do with anything? Well, he said, in Canada, you people over there, you all smoke cannabis, in the raw state, no tobacco or anything. And I said, yeah. I said, well, what does that have to do with it, with this? And he said, well, here in Europe, they mix it with tobacco. And I looked at him and I said, so you're saying that tobacco presents a danger? I said, why the hell didn't you say that when you were on the stage? There's just so many idiots running around. They're undercover for the pharmaceutical industry, and they're doing everything they can do to build this smoke screen so the public can't see through it. But believe me, the people that have made their own extracts and have used them, they see through it. And, the days of our domination are soon going to come to an end.
Yeah,
this just cannot go on.
It's so hypocritical, especially in the UK, that you can't give a child with cancer marijuana or cannabis. But from the age of 5 in this country, the law is in your own home you can give your child the most dangerous drug in the world, alcohol.
That's about it. Well, I mean, look at, like I said, look at the alternatives. Here are all these oncologists. From what I understand today, most oncologists, if they had cancer themselves, they will not even take their own treatments, but they'll give them to us. These are cancer-causing treatments, and they know it. But they're using a cancer-causing treatment to cure cancer. Now, who's insane here? It just defies description. Again, this cancer, especially cancer itself, is a huge industry all on its own. These pharmaceutical companies are making a fortune, off of really not treating cancer patients properly. They've made a lot of money off of this, and a great number of people, over the last few decades, really since this was outlawed, I look at this as being the darkest chapter in man's history. I mean, when you're a government and you outlaw the medicinal use of a plant that has this kind of medicinal history, I mean, who do you think you are? And by doing that, when you prohibit your own public from having this, you're committing genocide against them. So over the last few decades, well, in Canada, they outlawed it in 1923, so that's like 90 some odd years ago. I mein, how many people in just Canada alone have suffered and died for no damn reason? It's just insanity. But, I love this, there's a man in Canada named James Corbett. He does a series on the internet called the Corbett Report. If you go to the Corbett Report, episode 286, it's called Rockefeller Medicine. And if you watch that report, it'll explain to you why we have the horrible medical system we have today. It's all exposed. And there's many other documentaries out there. There's another one called The Marketing of Madness. It's about 2.5 hours long. But if you watch that, you'll probably never want to take another pill. And it's doctors themselves that are exposing this. So I think it's high time that the whole system grew up.
Yep, the doctors are definitely the biggest peddlers of death and misery out there, in my view. They've got no idea, really, I don't think, most of them, what it is they're doing. They learn nothing about health and just how to push drugs on people.
Well, they push them at us. I mean, if you and I have the same illness, we go to the same doctor, and he gives us the same medication. That doctor has no idea what effect those medications are going to have on us, because we're all chemically different. They're just playing games with us.
Yep.
Oh, you take one pill, you have a side effect. Well, here's another pill to fight that side effect, and then another pill to fight another side effect. It just goes on and on and on. And I honestly believe that the biggest killer on this planet is by far, I think, the pharmaceutical industry. Because, I mean, the harm that these chemicals and pills that they're shoving down people's throats, the harm they're doing to our bodies is inconceivable. It is not medicine, it's madness.
Yeah, well, if you look at the number of people that die as a result of taking prescription medications every year, that fact is absolutely borne out, Rick.
Yes.
And I got a very timely message from a friend when we were discussing this show and what hopes we had for it last night. And she's gone over to Canada to care for her father, who's he's very, very poorly and possibly won't last terribly long. And she was telling me about the immense difficulty she's having actually sourcing some cannabis oil and the hoops that she's having to jump through in order to get this prescribed. Now she says, unfortunately, by the time this happens, I'm afraid Father will be long gone. And it's far different from the situation we're led to believe exists currently in Canada.
Oh, yeah, again, that's another smokescreen. That marijuana access program, that's nothing but a bad joke. You know, I mean, why should I have to go to a doctor for him to give me the right to use cannabis? That's ridiculous. You know, I don't, you know, I've been telling people on many of these interviews, especially the ones in Canada, you know, if you have one of these cards that your government gives you, you know, that you can possess marijuana, you know, send it back to the Minister of Health and tell them to shove it where the sun don't shine. I mean, this is ridiculous. They have no right to be controlling this, and it's just a big money game with the Canadian government anyway, because what they do, they got growers, and I mean, the last report I read about the growers that work for them, they were paying the growers $328 a kilo for their product. And then when they sold that same kilo to the medicinal users, all of a sudden the price went up to over $6,000.
Wow.
So tell me, who are the drug dealers?
That's disgusting.
You know, I can go to any underground grower or illegal grower, and I can get much higher quality and at a much cheaper price. So as far as I'm concerned, I mean, the Canadian government are nothing but a pack of criminals.
Well, name one that ain't. Can you hear me? No, is there a government that's not a pack of criminals or working for a pack of criminals? I think they're all.
Well, you know, I mean, when you look at what's going on, I mean, well, okay. The Medical School of Virginia study, which was conducted to prove that cannabis caused cancer, well, when it proved just the opposite, when it proves that cannabinoids like THC were actually killing cancer cells, the American government stepped right in and shut that study down. And then they went to all the different universities and confiscated as much cannabis research as they possibly could. Then they turned around and put it all back in the hands of the pharmaceutical industry, you know, so they can take the high out of it. But this is nothing but a joke. I mean, look at what the pharmaceutical industry supplies, for God's sakes. You know, hillbilly heroin for, you know, all of these pain medications. They got half the damn world as high as a kite, and but they're worried about the high that cannabis. You know, this is so ridiculous. And you know, and all I've seen there is nothing. You know, when I look at especially the American government, I mean, since 1975, they have known what this plant can do, and they've known for sure. So for the last 40 years, they've been hiding the truth from their own people, and they've been hiding it from the rest of the world as well. And all of these other countries you see that have put these laws in place, for most part, what they did, they just followed the example America had set. And of course, the big money was manipulating their governments too. So, you know, you talk about a scam. You know, it's like I said, I don't call this the darkest chapter in man's history for no good reason.
No, I think you're spot on.
I think they instill fear in patients as well, doctors, that if they don't take the medication, then they're basically going to die. I've seen it for myself when I was about 16, 17. My friend, his mother had MS, multiple sclerosis, and she knew that we were smoking cannabis at the time, and she'd heard that it could be good for MS, so she invited us round, and she was like, "Oh, I want to try it." So we gave her some, and she was due to take her medication at, I think it was about 9 o'clock at night, or maybe 10. And when it got to the time, she'd be usually shaking, and she knew she had to take it, or else she couldn't stop shaking. And it was coming to the time, and she said, "You know, I feel that I don't need to take the medication." And she was fine. She was fine. She was happy. She's like, I feel that I don't need to take it. And I'm saying, that's good. It shows that it's actually working for you. But she got so paranoid in the next 20 minutes that if she didn't take the medication, she was basically going to die, or she was going to get worse with the condition. So she ended up taking the medication. She died, unfortunately, later. I always think about that. Would it have extended her life?
It would have done more. I mean, if she had been using the extracts, made from the proper strains, from basically what I've seen, this is a cure for MS. I mean, I met a man here, he came to one of my lectures, in Opatija in Croatia in 2011. He had the double vision, the heavy legs, MS. He was about 33 years old at that time, and he'd had the disease for quite some time, and he was getting a pension from the government. It was all, they had all the paperwork on it. So when he came to my lecture, I didn't meet him that year, but anyway, he went home, and he somehow or another he found 4 ounces of high quality bud, and he produced the oils from it. And I think he said he had got about 15 grams of oil. So the following year, I came back to Croatia, and I met him. And he told me, he said, when I went to that lecture of yours, he said, I couldn't believe what you were saying. But he said, I had to try it because, this same man had taken over 5,000 bee stings. These people are desperate. They're looking for answers. And so he went home and he produced the oil. And he told me, he said, Rick, he said, for the first 3 days, he said, I thought it was making me worse. And then he said, all of a sudden on the 4th day, the heavy legs were gone, the double vision was gone. And today that man can run like a deer. You'd never know he has any symptoms or anything from that disease. And then other serious things like AIDS. This is a wonderful treatment for that horrible condition. And there's so many other, serious medical problems. Arthritis, chronic pain. Certain strains of this plant that I worked with back in Canada were by far the strongest painkillers I ever seen. The first time I run into this, I had a man call me on the phone, and his wife, he was crying on the phone. His wife was in St. John's Hospital dying with bone cancer, and she was in agony. They had hydromorphine drips. They had everything going into her. They couldn't stop the pain. So when he called me, he said, I heard about you, and he said, do these extracts actually do what you say? And I said, of course they do. So I knew, by that time I was working with many different strains, so I knew the best pain-killing strain. So he came to the door that same day. I gave him 2 tubes of that oil. The very next morning, he called me up, and he said, Rick, he said, my wife is out of pain. He said, I can't believe this. And she'd gone through the whole thing, the chemo, the radiation, you name it, they threw it at her. And unfortunately, I have to admit that this lady didn't live. But she was supposed to die within a week. This is what the doctors had said. And she lived on for about 6 months with a good quality of life. She started going out to card club and everything again like that. And when she did pass away, she died with dignity. She didn't die in agony or pain. She just slipped away. And, you can't, there's no guarantee for any medication. But I can tell you, the batting average of this medication and the treatment of so many illnesses is so high, it's truly unbelievable. But every now and then, you do bump into one that you just can't heal. And of course, the problem there too is, it'll extend their life and give them a much better quality. But if we could simply, break free of all these stupid restrictions and do some a bit of simple research, I know we can bring these extracts up to much higher healing levels. I've done it myself. But the trouble is, I never have the freedom to do it. But there's medicines, I produced it myself back in Canada, just a small amount one time. And the power that oil had was just beyond belief. As a matter of fact, I've got it up on my website at phoenixtears.ca. We just put it up recently. It's actually not listed under the right thing yet because I'm not good with I'm not good with computers, but we got to do a couple changes. But if they go to the website, they'll find the super oils, how to produce the most medicinal oils possible, and I call them super oils. And when you read that information, it tells people, how I discovered this. It tells them the type of machinery they need, to actually, to make these oils. And I really think that, in the future, this is the way we have to go. But what I see in North America, people running off in all different directions, and there's so much hype about this CBD oil. I've always stated that I'd never met a cannabinoid that I didn't like. And I do respect the fact that, CBD does have its medicinal values. But to concentrate on CBD alone, I think is rather stupid. It's the synergetic effect of all these different cannabinoids working together. And as a matter of fact, the American Cancer Institute just recently admitted that the THC is a very effective cancer killer. So, this is what people have to, there's no question that, I've seen these same, videos about children who are taking CBD oil, who are epileptics, and it did reduce their seizures. Sometimes down from 100 or 300 seizures a week down to maybe 1 or 2 a week. But the problem was, even when this was still happening, even when these children were taking these oils. So what I'm saying is, put a little bit more THC in there, and let's see what happens. And I've experienced this. I've had this experience myself, with children in similar conditions. And the minute you start putting the THC to them, all of a sudden the seizures disappear altogether.
I remember when I was a kid and the information was starting to flood out in America about the medical uses, and there was a documentary on one of the Discovery channels on TV at the time about medical use of cannabis. And there was a Parkinson's patient, there was a kid who was having epileptic fits. He was having 1,000 fits a day, so he was constantly in a fit all day long.
Oh, God.
And there was an AIDS patient, full-blown AIDS, on there as well. The one with epileptic fits went down from 1,000 fits a day, constant fits, to 0. The Parkinson's guy stopped shaking. They showed you that on camera, smoking a joint and just stopping shaking completely. And the AIDS patient, he was taking it to eat. There's a lot of AIDS patients that just die because they can't eat.
Yeah.
And I remember a few years later, it must have been at least 3 to 4 years later, I thought, I'm going to look that AIDS patient up, because surely he's died now. No, he was still strong, still going to protests. And I looked him up, couldn't believe it. He looked so healthy as well, it was ridiculous.
The first AIDS patient that I treated, when he contacted me, I told him, he was an American, so I couldn't treat him directly, but I told him, what he needed to do, how to make the oil, and all the rest of it. And, he was using a walker. He was a dying man. He'd had AIDS for 20 years. And, and he told me this himself. He said, Rick, I got on that oil. He said, within a month, I was out jogging. And his viral load went to 0. He was taking 36 pills a day before he started taking the oil. Within a month, the only thing he was using was the oil. So, there's hope for people that have all of these horrible illnesses. But people have to realize that we're being denied from using them properly. To me, I think cannabis is basically the ultimate medicine. Although, I do have respect for many medicinal herbs and plants, and the extracts they can produce too, but I don't know of any other plant that has this vast array of healing abilities that the cannabis plant possesses. It's just, when you go through what I did, I had no medical background. I worked in a hospital, but I was a power engineer. I didn't have anything to do with the patients. But when I started seeing, people were coming to me with terminal cancer, and they'd also be diabetics and maybe chronic pain and God knows what else. And when I see, at first I was just giving out extracts from one strain, to different people. But then I started seeing, and where I was growing different strains myself, I started realizing that there was a difference, and the medicinal values varied a great deal from strain to strain. But luckily, for the most part, it seems that all these heavy sedative indica strains are very effective in the treatment of cancer. But some strains are better, other strains are better at fighting pain, or lowering ocular pressure for glaucoma patients, or controlling blood sugar, for diabetics, that type of thing. So one day I got the bright idea, and I said, well, what would happen if I mixed these oils all together? And that's what I did. And when I started passing that stuff out, it was literally a cure-all. People that have been diabetics for years, all of a sudden they didn't need insulin anymore. And for diabetics and people like that, this oil, in many cases, you no longer need insulin, but in some cases they still require, usually the insulin amount is reduced, but they still require, a certain amount. But it's not just the effect about your blood sugar. As a matter of fact, I've even seen what I think is the pancreas being rejuvenated. And, and people actually producing the insulin, their body's producing it the way they should. So, the thing is with diabetics, the disease itself, bad circulation, diabetic ulcers, all these horrible things, these people in the nerve damage and things of that nature. Well, this oil prevents all of that. So this is the best thing you could possibly, use if you're a diabetic. And that thing about diabetic ulcers, I look at the medical system, I watch what they do. Somebody with a diabetic ulcer on their foot or something, it won't heal. The medical system just stands around and twiddles their thumbs until gangrene sets in, and then they go out and they start cutting off parts of your body. But if you take this oil and you put it on a diabetic ulcer, in no time, it'll heal it. So this relieves so much worry for so many people. I really basically think that I don't care what disease you're suffering from. I really don't think that there's a better medication on this planet that you could use.
Agreed.
Thank you, Rick. Sorry, Tony. I've just got a question here that's quite specific from the chat room, and it's from Paul. Paul says, my neighbour's child is 12 years old. He suffers from rheumatoid arthritis and also has developed chronic pain syndrome. He's been injected twice per week with Enbrel. Is the Rick Simpson oil suitable? If so, can it be given together with his Enbrel? Rick.
Well, I don't recommend that the oil be taken along with pharmaceuticals. I always told people that came to me, because, many of these people were taking 24, 30 pills a day. And I always told them, I said, the oil is going to recognize these pills for what they are. They're toxins. And these oils are going to want them out of your body, and it may give you some stomach problems and things of that nature. But often these medications do that all by themselves. And so I always told them, go back to your doctor. He's the one that put you on this stuff, so go back to him and have him step you off it. But I was shocked. In many cases, people come back to me 30 days later, and the only thing they were using was the oil. Some of them didn't even go to the doctors. They even went off their heart medications, but none of them died. So that's what the pharmaceutical industry is so afraid of, because if we all have access to this oil, they're out of business. And that's the end for them. And I think they should be out of business, along with Monsanto and all the rest of them.
Great. We've got another question from a friend, a lady that we know is listening. Let me just open this up here. Where is it? What about for leaky gut immune disorder and psoriasis? They are linked, and do you think that the oil would benefit or cure this, and what would be the best way to take it if so?
Well, you can use the oil, but take it by mouth, the way I recommend, or in suppository form, which is also very effective. But basically, this oil, if you've got the high quality oil, it rejuvenates vital organs. Like your liver. The cirrhosis part of it. There's that other medical term you mentioned. I'm not aware of what that even is. I hate these big words these people use. I don't think half these doctors even understand it themselves. But
I think if that's the friend I'm thinking of, Tony, was it actually psoriasis?
Yeah, psoriasis.
Psoriasis, definitely. Yes, you got psoriasis. Psoriasis comes from within. It's in your T cells. But, I've treated psoriasis externally, just topically. People that had suffered with this horrible disease for years, and the effects were just amazing. I know one time a man came to me. He had some nerve damage up in his neck, and it was giving him a lot of pain. So he came to me, and he wanted, the oil for pain relief. So I provided the oil, but I noticed, like I could see around his neck and stuff, like he was just covered in psoriasis. So I mentioned it to him. I said, I think you'll find that this will be very effective for psoriasis. So he left, and it was about 2 weeks later. The same man came to my door, and he was totally mad. I never seen anybody quite so angry. And he come to me, he thanked me. At first he said, Rick, the pain relief was wonderful, but then he opened his shirt, and he said, but look what else it did. And here the psoriasis was basically all gone in 2 weeks. And he looked at me and he said, Rick, I've been going for coal tar treatments and all of these other horrible, stupid treatments for years. He said, I got this disease when I was 16 years old. He said, I'm 57 years old now. He said, so 41 years, that disease ruined my life. And he said, I come to you, you give me this simple extract, and my God, it's curing it. He couldn't believe it. So it's, basically, if this medicine is used properly and it's produced properly, I think it's, the answer to practically all our medical problems.
Great. That's a great answer. Nice solution for people. Hopefully, to get to try it out and see how it works.
Oh, and that question too earlier about rheumatoid arthritis. I did an interview here just the other night with a gentleman in the States. He does a show over there. And he told me, he said, my wife was basically dying from rheumatoid arthritis. He said she was literally, her complexion had turned gray, and she was just suffering all the time. And he said, I had given up hope on this thing. He said, we tried everything there was to try. And he said, so one day I went to a dispensary, and he said, I seen Rick Simpson oil. And he said, I thought it just might help her ease things a bit for her. And he said, so I bought a couple grams. I guess they charged them $75 a gram, which is, that's highway robbery. But he took it home, and he started giving her small amounts of it. And he told me, he said, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. He said, right now, and he asked me the question, he said, do you know where my wife is today? And I said, well, I have no idea. He said, she's out hunting with her father. She has no sign of the disease whatsoever now. And these people were animal lovers too. And he knew about, a lot of the interviews I'd done, how I talk about animals. And he said, you were certainly right, he said, about the effects of this medication on animals and, treating things like cancer. He said, we had an old dog here. He said, it had a tumor about the size of your fist. And he said, the first dose I gave that dog, he said, the very next day, about 1/3 of the tumor had gone in one day. Now, that's part of the reason I love to work with animals, because they have a much faster metabolism than humans. And in some cases, you can almost literally see it happening. This is the answer to so many of our medical needs. The veterinarians might not like what I'm saying, but, we grow to love these pets. And I know I've had dogs myself, and you get very attached to them. And I've seen the rejuvenating effects that this oil has on basically any dog. Why shouldn't we be allowed to treat our pets also?
I've seen it too. I've seen the results out there. I've seen the vets talking about it for quite a long time. Right, we've been going really well for an hour now. I'm going to put a couple of tunes on so that we can all take a break. And then that'll be it with tunes, because we've got so many questions here and things to get through that I know that we've not got enough time. So cheers, Rick, for joining us. It's been unbelievable hour, and I can't wait for the next hour. I'm desperate for the loo right now.
I'm looking forward to it too, brother.
Cheers.
Hi, and welcome back to Enemy Within on People's Internet Radio. We've just had a fabulous first hour with Rick Simpson, and I'd like to kick the second hour off with a question from Jason, which many people might find quite amusing, but having spent 20-odd years as a long-distance lorry driver, I know it can be a serious bane on people's life. And that question is, Rick, quite simply, does it work for piles?
Well, I guess the right name is hemorrhoids, but yes, most definitely, it's truly an amazing treatment for this type of condition. I had a man back in Canada years ago when I first started all this. He was totally against what I was doing, and he was rejecting it in every which way he could. But he had this big thing on his nose, pretty ugly, whatever it was, and he didn't get it was my oil, but he got it from a friend of mine. He did finally take some oil, and he tried it on his nose. Well, in 2 weeks, the problem was healed. So about, I guess, 3 or 4 weeks later, he come to my door one day, and he said, what would that do for piles? And I just laughed because I was looking for this opening anyway. And I said, all you have to do is put some on your finger. And I said, do I have to tell you where to shove it? And he was mad. He took the oil and he left, slammed the door, and it was about a month later. I met him in a parking lot in Amherst, and he walked up to me. He had one finger held up in the air. When he walked up to me, he said, one treatment. He said, I've been bleeding from the ass for 20 years. He said, I put that oil up there once, and it was gone. That quick. He couldn't believe it. So, definitely, if you have piles or hemorrhoids or anything like that, anything that, there's so many conditions out there that, that's what I noticed when patients were coming to me years ago. It was like half the time they didn't even have a diagnosis. The doctor said, first they thought it was this, and then they thought it was something else, and in the end they don't know what it is. But it didn't make any difference. The oil healed them. To me this is, it's really about taking your responsibility for your own life. And in truth, when you start producing these oil extracts yourself, you become your own doctor. You don't have much need of doctors anymore. I have the greatest respect for surgeons and, and people in that profession. But when you look at the other side of medicine, the pill pushers and the oncologists, I think they have a lot of wising up to do.
Yeah, I don't think there's too many of them that would take it themselves. I think they've done a study, didn't they, on oncologists, how many of them would actually take any of that stuff, and it didn't work out that well for them.
No, something to the tune of 10%, I think, would use actually the same treatments they give us. So 90%, 90% of oncologists not willing to take their own treatments. Hey, if somebody wants to take an oil treatment, and if I could provide it, I'd be happy to sit down and take the treatment with them. Would a doctor do that? I don't think so.
No, not if they had any sense. John Mack asked earlier, quite a long while ago, we have been taking note, what it was that gave you the idea to treat your own cancer with cannabis oil.
Well, originally it came, my cousin died in 1972 at 25 from cancer, and he died a horrible death. He went from 200 pounds right down to about 50 pounds when he died. And it was about 2 or 3 years later when I worked at a hospital, and I was leaving work this day, and I just got in my car and turned the radio on, and here's this announcer. He's laughing like an idiot, but he's talking about some medical report that had just come in from the U.S., which stated that THC, the active ingredient in marijuana, had been found to kill cancer cells. But the way it was presented, I just thought, this is somebody's sixth sense of humor at play. But many years later, after I received the head injury, it was about a year after the injury that I finally started, smoking cannabis, and that definitely did help me. But it gave me more rest because I have post-concussion syndrome from the head injury, and that affected my blood pressure. The noise was so loud you couldn't sleep. And there was many other health problems, that went along with it, like balance issues and things like that from the injury. So everything the medical system gave me just made me worse. And then, it was about a year afterwards that I watched an episode of The Nature of Things with Dr. David Suzuki, and it was called Reefer Madness 2. But it was showing all these people smoking cannabis, and it was helping, some very severe medical problems, and so, when I seen that, I had smoked cannabis before, but I never looked at it like a medicine. And so I went to a friend of mine, and I got some cannabis from him, and sure enough, when I smoked it, it worked better than anything the medical system was giving me. But no doctor, after that, I started asking all the doctors for a prescription because, as I said, we had the Medical Marijuana Access Program. The doctors, they all said the same thing. It's bad for the lungs. It's still under study. Now, this is a plant we've been using in medicine for 5,000 years. Some of the greatest healers in history use this, but it's still under study. Now, I wonder why that is. It's truly pathetic what's going on.
Yep, thousands of years. There's plenty of documented evidence. We've got some more questions. One from Susie. Please can you ask us a few names of strains, or tell us where there might be a chart to look at to find which strains for which ailments? Thank you.
Well, a lot of these seed companies today that are selling seeds, they have, in many cases, they have information about the medical qualities of the strains they're selling. I don't know how accurate this is, because really, in my opinion, the seed industry is in shambles.
Yep.
There's dozens and dozens of seed companies. I get this question all the time. What strain should I grow? Well, I can't tell anyone an answer to that because, like there's very famous strains like White Widow for one. Now, the White Widow I was growing in Canada, I found it was an amazing painkiller, and it worked very well in the treatment of cancer and many other disorders. But if you go out and you order White Widow, because all these seed companies, they all sell White Widow. If you ordered White Widow from 5 different seed companies and you brought those plants or those seeds in and planted them, you'd find that you're growing 5 different types of cannabis, with different medical benefits. So it's almost impossible to answer, the question. So I've always told the public the best thing to do is just look for a strong indica strain that is 20% THC or more, and and you're looking for that sleepy sedative effect. But if you go online to these seed companies, I think you can find out quite a bit of information about the medical effects of the varieties that they're selling.
Yeah.
And I would always recommend, like, there's many strains out there, like LA Confidential, Pineapple Kush. These strains are up 25-26%. But if you're looking for these very strong strains, I would try to go back to the company that brought them out. Because you can't be sure. When you're ordering the same seeds from another company, you're not really sure what you're going to get.
Well, in my experience, it's even worse than what you said. I agree with what you said, but I think if you bought 5 different packets of White Widow from 5 different companies, I think you'd end up with a lot more than 5 different varieties. I think you'd end up with more like 10 or 15, because no seed companies nowadays seem to be stabilising seeds properly.
You're quite correct, brother.
And there's no way, I don't believe, that they've got the time or the space to actually do that job properly, because it takes so many generations of inbreeding to stabilise a seed.
Yeah.
And yet we get new strains or varieties from a seed that just won a cannabis cup, let's say, last year, it now becomes extremely commercially valuable, and everybody wants to cross that with their own big spuds commercially valuable seed, and you'll find within months or, you know, certainly within a year that strain will be available, and you can't possibly have done the genetic stabilisation in that time. It can't be done. So we've got this massive commercial nightmare of a market. And I believe this market started when the High Times got involved with the Dutch and created the cannabis cup, and it went from being one of our best friends to being little more than a commercial advertisement for seed companies and all sorts of things that people use to grow with, especially in the indoor market, that in a lot of cases they don't need.
No, you're absolutely right. I did attend the Cannabis Cup once, but that was it. I tend to try to stay away from most of these big hemp events anyway, because for the most part, I mean, I went to Chile last year. I did 2 lectures at Expo Weed in Chile. That's the biggest event they have in South America. There was something to the tune of 30,000 people in attendance, and when I did my lectures, there was only maybe 400 to 500 people at each lecture. You know, the rest of them are just a bunch of potheads, right, walking around smoking their joints and, you know, and having a good time. You know, they're not concerned about their health until they get sick. You know, so it's, the cannabis events for the most part, I found that you just couldn't reach the numbers. You know, but by doing shows like this, you know, I'm reaching vast numbers of people everywhere. So I think it's much better to spend my time, you know, doing this type of programming.
Yep. I agree. Vin's saying here, are seed companies inclined towards medical use of hemp? Well, not these sort of seeds. Well, hold on. Yeah, we're talking about cannabis. This keeps coming up, cannabis and hemp. It gets quite confusing. But we're specifically talking about hybrid cannabis here, and it's a long, long way from hemp. So, I don't know.
Well, the whole thing with me is, I mean, I've been asked that question so many times, and, you know, why do you call it hemp oil? And I said, well, if you look at history, all through history, farmers called this plant hemp. You know, they had different varieties. Some would be what they would classify as marijuana, but they were grown everywhere. So, I mean, I just simply, when I chose the name, I just said, well, hemp oil. And then the hemp seed oil companies, there a bunch of them, there's 5 of them contacted me one time. They said, I was the worst thing that ever happened to the movement. And all this nonsense, and I'm giving their industry a bad name. And I wrote back to them and I said, well, why don't you label your product properly? You know, I said, you know, like you people have been running around forever just calling this hemp oil. But when you go look at the back of the label, what does it say? Cold pressed hemp seed oil. All they have to do is add the word oil or seed, hemp seed oil, because that's what they're selling. They didn't like it much, but I guess now that this has spread so far, I don't think that what I've done has done anything to slow the progress down in getting this plant, you know, made completely legal again.
Yep.
Well, even hemp was illegal in the US.
Oh yeah, you're not allowed to.
Ludicrous when America started on hemp. America wouldn't have been so successful and started so quickly as a nation if it wasn't for hemp.
Well, there's no law against growing hemp. But the problem is with growing hemp in America, you're allowed to grow it, but it's not allowed to have leaves and it's not allowed to have buds. So how are you going to grow it? That Marijuana Tax Act they put in place in 1937, what a piece of work that was. You know, it's just frightening. And it's the same thing in Canada.
I know from people, fitness people who were taking hemp protein, they couldn't get it in the US because it was illegal. They had to get it from Canada. Yeah,
that doesn't surprise me. Yeah. But it's
and all it is from hemp seeds. That's all it is. Hemp seeds. I've had it.
Yeah, I mean, I actually had a cancer patient from Australia contact me and she said, I've been using that hemp oil now for 3 months and it hasn't done a damn thing. And then, so I wrote back and I said, did you make the oil yourself? And then the email comes back, no, I bought it down at the health food store. Well, you got the wrong oil.
Like a nice egg.
It's kind of misleading anyway when you call this hemp oil because maybe hemp grease would be a better word because, you know, if you have the oil and it's properly made, you know, it's resin. And, you know, some strains will produce, you know, thicker resins than others. But for the most part, it's like it has the consistency of a thick grease, at room temperature. But when you heat it up a little bit, then it liquefies and turns into, well, more or less like an oil. So I hope people understand that. And if you ever buy or go purchase oil from someone and it runs out of the tube, don't buy it. God knows what's in it.
Yep, good advice. Well, at that point, can we talk about regulation? It came up last time he was on People's Internet Radio and Martin's show, and it was a matter of big contention in the chat box, and certainly with me, I've got no time for regulation at all, and from what you've already said, I don't think you have. So, what about a test kit? Because for me, that's the only form of regulation that we need. Have you any knowledge of a simple test kit that people could use to test oil?
Well, there are kits coming out. I believe there's one available in England that you can only do, I think, 8 or 10 tests with it. It tells you the THC, CBD levels, and CBN or something. And there is equipment coming out. There's another piece of gear that I heard about. It was supposed to be around $350, and it is supposed to give you very good readings. So these things are becoming much more available, and it's going to get more so every day. So this is going to solve a lot of problems because when people go to buy these oils, they simply do not know what they're buying. That's the problem. They're just taking somebody else's word for it.
Yep.
But, in the same one, I always told people, I said, if you want to, and this is what I promote, producing the oil yourself. And if you have no experience with this plant, then just find someone who smokes cannabis. It's not it's not something that's rare. Get that person to come with you, go to your local underground growers or dealers, and sample the cannabis they have. And usually, that's what I used to do. And when I'd sit there and make a joint, smoke about half it, if it made me feel like I needed to go lay down, that's what I made the medicine from. But if it gave me this energizing effect, then I stayed away from it. So practically anyone can tell the difference, between sleepy and being energized. So it's a relatively easy thing to do, but, so many people have this paranoia about this issue. And I've always said, basically, if we didn't have these stupid laws in place, people wouldn't have much reason to be paranoid. It's just the culture that we've evolved, and
yep.
Believe me, we've gone off the track a long time ago, and we got to get mankind back on the right path. And if we're going to save this planet, we have no other choice.
I agree with most of that, apart from where you said laws. They're not actually laws, it's statutes and acts, it's legislation.
Yes, it is, yeah. But they had the power of law. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, they have the power of law when we consent to them as the legal person, which is getting back to where I was going at the beginning, and would like to spend more time talking to you about sometime if you're up for it another day. But
sure.
That would go on. But Vin's asked a question earlier. My neighbour's child is 12 years old. He suffers from rheumatoid arthritis and also has developed chronic pain syndrome. He is being injected twice per week with, is that Embret? I think it's Embret.
I think that's the same question I was asked earlier, brother.
Oh, has that already been gone? I apologise for that. I don't know what I was doing when that one went on. Right, okay, so anyone else got a question there then? Because I'm going to have to open up my other thing here with questions. I didn't hear that one.
Well, Rick, I was talking to a guy at work. He listens to the show on an odd occasion. I said, I've got Rick Simpson on the show later. He went, Rick Simpson, my hero. I said, yeah. He said, he's got a list of names of people that cannabis has worked for medicinal use, or a checklist, or a list of people, or numbers of people, and you were up to like 3,000 a while ago. But what number are you up to now?
Well, no, before I left Canada, I haven't been able to treat anyone since 2009. That's when I had to stay in Europe because of the corruption of the Canadian government. But from 2003 till about 2009, I treated over 5,000 people with all kinds of different conditions. I went through the legal system, if that's what you want to call it. There's nothing again, they're in bed with the government. It's the same nonsense. But, after going through all of that, like I said, I got to the point that I'm not very proud to call myself a Canadian anymore. And I'm looking for another country that I can settle down in and, get back to the research. And, because my aim is simply to perfect this medicine. And I know how to do it. I know how to do it right now. And, I'm affiliated too with some of the top experts in the world, like Dr. Lemire Hanoush and Dr. Robert Malamud and people like that. So, my aim is actually, I would like to start a seed company, and provide seeds with known medicinal qualities, so there's no more smokescreen anymore. People will know, what they need to buy to suit their illness. And I think with the help of Dr. Hanoush and individuals like, that caliber, that in a very short time we could determine what cannabinoid levels are required to fight each and every illness in the most effective way. Let's get this medicine perfected. But this is not what I'm seeing happening right now. Just like I said, people just running off and making all these stupid claims and, and like I said, most times connecting my name with it. And that really upsets me. But that whole thing with my name, a fellow said to me one time in an interview, he said, you were so conceited, you even named the oil after you. And I said, no, that's not the case at all. I said it was the previous leader of the hemp movement, Jack Hare, that gave it that name. As a matter of fact, well, Jack and I got to be friends, although we never met. We spent a great many hours talking on the phone. And we became, as close as about as close as you can get, I guess. But one night Jack referred to that oil as Rick Simpson oil. And I said to him, Jack, why are you connecting my name to this? I said, this is hemp oil. And he turned around and he said, well, aren't you Rick Simpson? You couldn't argue with Jack Hare. But, that it was after Jack's death that Steve Hagar made it publicly known that Jack had told Steve before he had the heart attack that if anything ever happened, that the torch was to be passed to me. So from that time on, basically, I've been the leader of the movement. But I'm in complete agreement with you about any form of regulation. This sickens me. There's so many people running around in the cannabis movement, claiming, oh yes, tax us, regulate us. And look, as the leader of the movement, I don't even consider these people to be activists. They're simply selling out to the system. There's only one thing that, that needs to be done here. Total freedom. Anyone who wants to grow this, as far as I'm concerned, we should cover the planet in it because it's going to solve most of our problems. So anybody screaming about taxation and legalization, I don't think any of these people are for real.
Me neither.
Before the show, we were talking about Canada in particular, and I was explaining there's different provinces in Canada. I've got friends in Quebec, I've got friends in Ontario, I've got friends in Vancouver. I've just been over to Vancouver a couple of months ago. And it's very open in Vancouver. There's marijuana dispensaries, and you can smell it everywhere.
Yeah.
But when I talk to my friends across Canada, it's very different across the way it's looked at. Is that true?
Oh yes, quite true. I think the further you go east in Canada, the worse it gets. I mean, this where I come from, Nova Scotia, is very conservative.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, I had a gentleman call me from California one night when I was still in Canada, and he said, is this Rick Simpson? And I said, yes. And he said, do you really live in Nova Scotia? And I said, well, yes, that's where I'm from. And he said, I've been to Nova Scotia 3 times. He said, that's the most backwards conservative place on this earth. And he said, you're down there making these extracts. And, but I honestly think if I had started making all this noise years ago, like if I had lived in British Columbia, I think they would have found a way to shut me down. But like once you go over the Rockies and then you're getting into all the other provinces, and then, like you said, by the time you get to Nova Scotia, I think the government just looked at me and thought, well, that's just a voice in the wilderness and we'll shut them up. And believe me, they did everything they could to do that, but I just kept, to me, how do you sit there and, watch your friends and neighbors, die from these horrible illnesses and you have an answer? How could you do that? I couldn't live with myself. And in 2003, when I seen, it worked before for my medical problems from the injury, but then when I cured my own cancer with it, I started realizing the healing power, that this medication has. And I had 3 children and I had 3 grandchildren. And I realized that if somebody didn't do the right thing here, there was no future for them. So I really at that point, this is over 12 years ago now. Back then, I really thought that they can't hold this back. Maybe a year, 2 years. Sooner or later, the government will sober up and allow it. But here it is 12 years later, and now this thing is just starting to explode.
Well, I think that the proof that the medical industry is controlled by the pharmaceutical industry is the fact that cannabis or marijuana is not used alongside conventional medicine. It's not even used alongside it. So if someone has cancer and they're getting conventional treatment. They're not even using that alongside, just to use it to see if any effect came from it at all, because they don't want it to be shown that it does have an effect and then affect the pharmaceutical industry.
Well, you're quite right, brother. You see, when I do these lectures and interviews, I often come up with the same thing. Prove me wrong. Mm-hmm. I don't want people to believe a word I'm saying. Simply go out, buy about 30 grams of good cannabis bud, preferably indica, produce a medicine or medication following our instructions on phoenixtears.ca. Practically anyone can make this medicine, but please follow the safety instructions. Then, once that usually 30 grams will give you, if you're using high-grade bud, it'll give you 30, maybe anywhere from 3 to 5 grams of good oil. And then simply take that oil, find somebody with a skin cancer, or a diabetic ulcer, or psoriasis, or a third-degree burn, anything like that. Put that oil on it, put a bandage on it, change it every 3 days, and watch what happens. How dare they tell us there's no cure for cancer, and no answer for diabetic ulcers and things like that? It's totally ridiculous.
An interesting point's just been raised by Andrew Fletcher in the chat room, and Andrew does incredible work. I don't know if you've ever come across it, Rick, whereby people derive incredible health benefits, and I know because I've done it myself, and I get people contacting me day in, day out because they've done it as a result of hearing the interview, and all you do is raise the head of your bed 6 inches. But Andrew did point out that growing hemp is one of the greatest methods of capturing CO2. I mean, we'd found all this bullshit story about we've got an overabundance of CO2. Well, if that was a major concern, then why in God's name would they be cutting down rainforests at such a rate? Because CO2 is plant food, isn't it?
Well, it's exactly the same with paper as well. Cutting down trees for paper when hemp is 3 times more productive for paper than a tree.
Well, this is all people have to understand. I mean, the reason our CO2 levels are going up so high is because we're using all these fossil fuels. And this is what they contain. The CO2 has been buried for thousands or millions of years. And you bring that to the surface and burn it, and up goes the CO2 levels. But this gentleman is absolutely correct. When you use cannabis as a fuel, well, you grow the cannabis, take the seeds or whatever you want from it, and medicines or whatever, and you take what's left and you produce a fuel with it. And these new enzyme processes they have now, they say as much as 1,800 gallons of ethanol can be produced from 1 acre of hemp. Now, 1 acre is a very small piece of land, but that would make every one of us that did this energy independent. We'd have enough, ethanol to run our cars, to heat our homes, and we'd have, a few hundred gallons left over. And all you have to do is just look at the two. Take some high-grade, like 99% isopropyl alcohol or something like that. Put it in a spoon, light it on fire, and sit there and watch that beautiful blue flame. No smoke, no pollution, just a beautiful blue flame. Now take a spoonful of gasoline and do the same thing and watch what happens. That's the reason we have this problem. But when you turn the hemp back into a fuel, I mean, while the hemp is growing, it's taking in CO2, it's giving off fresh air. At the end of the cycle, the CO2, or whatever CO2 it took in is just the same amount is being released back into the atmosphere. So there is no rise in CO2 levels. I honestly think that cannabis could solve practically all of our energy needs if it was grown and used properly.
There's a lot of people here at this radio station and that are listening that would agree with you 100% on that, and they do agree with you. Can I get it back to growing methods and purification of the oil? What happens in the process? Is there any preference to a growing method? Because out there where you was in Canada and the Americans and that, it's all a lot different at this side of the world. Most people that grow over this country, or over this side of the world in Europe, will grow indoors. Mm-hmm. And therefore they'll be using hydroponics or some sort of a soil or soilless mix or wick systems, whatever. Is there?
I've used them all. So over the years I tried everything you can imagine. But indoor growing can, to experienced growers it's not so bad, but for beginners, indoor growing can be rather difficult.
Yep.
As far as, and a lot of these strains they've developed now, cannabis is a hardy plant, but with all of these crosses and manipulation they're doing with these different strains, in many cases, even experienced growers have a hard time growing some of these strains that are available now. But in my own opinion, I honestly think that, I like growing in greenhouses, but even above that, I like the great outdoors. Just some good horse manure or sheep manure, the proper pH around 6.4, and you just put the plants in the ground, give them the manure, add water, and just keep giving them plenty of water because they're water-loving plants, and they like to be in slightly acidic soil. But if you do that, the difference between growing indoors and outdoors is nothing but a joke. All of a sudden, you're not harvesting a plant like indoors. If you get a plant that's an ounce or an ounce and a half of bud on it, well, that you've done quite well in most cases. But outdoors, that same plant, if it's a hardy strain, that same plant might give you a pound or a pound and a half if it's grown properly.
Yep.
So to me, outdoor growing is the name of the game.
I read a comment underneath the on YouTube, underneath the interview that you did with Richie Allen just a couple of days ago, and somebody posted on there, someone that's called themselves John Smith, and they said that they met a guy in a shop who had apparently some photographs of the government had been growing in their labs these plants with branches that weighed from 1 to 2 kilos of bud per branch. Have you any knowledge of that?
Well, on that one, I know I think it's down in Mississippi in the U.S. that the government has a big facility down there, and they've been growing it for years, all behind big fences and the rest of it. But, I think this is actually probably happening in other countries as well, at least to some extent. But, it's this thing I've heard recently where Monsanto and all that is jumping into the game. I've heard I was sent a contact or an email here a while ago from someone, and he said that these genetically modified seeds, cannabis seeds, they're claiming that you can grow like tremendous amounts of weight. But again, you have to look at it. You're growing a genetically modified plant. Why do we need to genetically modify cannabis? Yeah. I don't think it needs a modification.
Well, the reason is simple, because we're going back to a comment that was made in the chat, and I see it often from a lot of people earlier, is that you can't patent a plant. Well, you're wrong, all those people that say that, because it has been patented. The Chinese government have got, I don't know how many hundreds of patents, and the FDA are next on the list with a couple of hundred patents on the compounds within the plant. Now when you add your own compounds or change them and put that into the genetics, the seed, and you come up with these auto-flowering plants, these feminized seeds, these huge yielding plants and things like this, make them desirable, and then you water down the stock seed, the purebred seeds and all that stock is disappearing. It's even disappearing from the wild in a lot of countries, as you'll know. Now, when you do all that, you now get control of the seed in the way that they've proved to us before and currently that they do. And this is what it's all about. It's another honeypot. It's inviting people in to get more from what nature was giving them. So you think you're getting something good, but in the long run, when they've got this whole web spun, they're going to lock down the door on all those patents. If you're caught in possession of those genetics, then you're going to suffer similar or maybe even worse consequences to what these farmers all around the world are facing now from the genetics companies.
Yeah, but the farmers aren't going to continue to put up with this. If I had worked all my life on my farm and some of this genetically modified trash from Monsanto had blown over my land and then they're taking me to court, with the track record that we've seen, although I do hear now that Monsanto is losing a lot of these cases, finally. But if I'd worked all my life on a farm like that, I think I would simply grab a rifle and go put a bullet in their head. This is ridiculous, especially when you look at the circumstances. With the wind, it's blowing these seeds over, onto other properties. So how could the farmer that owns that property be held responsible? To me, this is just nonsense. And it amazes me that Monsanto and these companies even can believe that they can get away with this, this shit. This has to stop.
Well, they believe it because they're deeply embedded into the American government and the FDA. They've got their own laws written, haven't they, that enable them to do what they like and to make them immune from prosecution to any of the consequences from what might happen with their unexperimented on genetics, you know.
Well, you know, the FDA too, I mean, and that's another organization I just have to laugh at. I mean, it's pathetic. You know, they tell you, oh, you know, it costs hundreds of millions of dollars to get a drug tested and put into use. Why does it cost hundreds of millions of dollars? I mean, I can take 10 patients, give them the oil, and watch what it does. Does that cost hundreds of millions of dollars? It's just these people are all connected with the pharmaceutical industry and the government. They're all just a bunch of scam artists, and they're all filling their pockets. You know, the FDA is nothing but a fraud, and that goes for the United Nations too.
Yep, agreed, 100%. It's pretty easy provable to anyone with an inquisitive mind as well.
Well, this is what I encourage people to do. You know, go out and do a little bit of simple research. Get on your computer, you know, and start researching what I'm saying. It's all, you know, the facts are right there. You know, and it just seems to me like, you know, like, oh, there's so many people too I was contacting, you know, like Christians particularly. They think, you know, that God wouldn't want them to use this medicine. This is ridiculous, for God's sakes. I mean, if you look back, you know, and I mean, Christians hate to hear this, but the bottom line is, if you look at the ingredients of the holy anointing oil, there it is, right in your face.
That's what I was just going to say. I was just going to say that, Rick. Moses put it in the holy oil.
Well, there it is. Canna blossom. I mean, that's what they called. That's what they called female, or the bud from the female plant at that time. Canna blossom. Yeah. You know. So I really don't think that it was the power of God that Jesus was using so much. I think it had a lot more to do with the healing power of cannabis, and that's how I believe he worked most of his medical miracles.
Yeah, the Moses scripture describe it as sweet kanuma.
Yeah, all the names. Yeah, aromatic cane. Oh, well, that's another problem.
Called it sweet then.
No, but that's another problem with this plant. Like, you know, worldwide, there's over 400 different slang terms to describe the cannabis plant. You know, marijuana, Mary Jane, it just goes on and on and on. Ganja, you know, and, you know, why do we do that? Why don't we just call it what it is?
But the marijuana thing was that, marijuana is actually a wild Mexican tobacco. And that was part of the propaganda that wild Mexicans were bringing in this stuff to the U.S. So that's
that was William Randolph Hearst in his yellow journalism, because he hated Pancho Villa and his marijuana smoking army. So then Hearst turned around and started putting all those reports in the papers. You know, person smoked cannabis, went crazy, took an axe, killed their family. You know, what kind of nonsense? You know, if anything, I think if you smoke cannabis or use it, it certainly doesn't promote violence. If anything else, it's more likely to put you in bed.
And the absolute opposite, Rick. But we've got a question from Uniquely in the chat room. He says, "Can Rick be my new adopted stepfather?" So it's obviously going down well, Rick. What I wondered if we could possibly do tonight in the little time we've got left, if we could possibly touch on your new super oils that you've worked on, and if you could perhaps tell us a bit more about them, please.
Well, I'd be happy to. Well, years ago, I went out and I bought one of these, just a cheap model vaporizer, you know, with the bottle on top. And I brought it home. And of course, at that time, I mean, I was producing these high quality oils. So I started vaporizing these oils in the vaporizer. You know, and as time went by, the bottle became yellow. And then finally, droplets of this golden extract started to drip down the inside. Well, you know, different times I had tried to take extracts out of hash pipes and things, and it was no good. It was burned. So this day, you know, the droplets were getting quite thick, so I took the top off the bottle, and I heated just a small amount of alcohol, and with my finger, I just washed the inside of the bottle out, and I walked over to the door, and I was just getting ready to throw it out. And that's when it struck me. I said, that hasn't been burned. It's been vaporized. So I went back and I just took a little stainless steel measuring cup and I put it on a coffee warmer so that, you know, it would evaporate the alcohol off it. And when I did, there was only about 2 grams of oil there, but it was beautiful, golden, see right through it, but it had kind of a reddish tinge to it, and you don't see that very often. So I honestly thought, you know, that this oil would have no power at all, but I put a little bit on a cigarette. I mean, just, oh my God, 1/10 the amount I would normally use, just a little dab of it. And as soon as about 2 puffs, and I was ready to go lay down, it just knocked me. And then a friend of mine came in later that day, and he had extensive experience over the years with smoking cannabis and good hash and all of this. And when he tried that, he told me, he said, Rick, he said, I've never seen anything like this. And at the time, I was treating a cancer patient with skin cancer in a nearby town. So, I've been using these high-quality oils that I've been producing, and often when people have skin cancer, when you put the oil on, you feel these little tugging sensations. An hour or 2 or 3 hours later, you'll start feeling just slight tugging sensations. Well, what's happening is the oil is drawing the cancer cells to it. It's killing the cancer cells, and that tugging you're feeling is actually the healing that's taking place. So I'd been treating this man for about a week, and so I went in, and he was a long-distance trucker. So I gave him this oil, and I put a new bandage on his nose with this new oil on it. And at that time, he was leaving. He was on the road for a week. So when he got back, I went up to his house, and I asked him, I said, how'd you make out with that new oil? And he said, Rick, he said, about an hour after you put that oil on there, he said, I was driving down the highway, and he said, it felt like somebody had my nose with a pair of pliers. He said, the tugging was so intense, it was unbelievable. As soon as he said it, I just smiled. I said, yeah, okay. That told me, that it was more effective in killing cancer cells very rapidly. So this is the direction that I would like to take it. But when I talk to fellow, people that are considered to be experts in this field, when I talk to them about this, it just seemed to go in one ear and out the other. My oils have been tested, even that rice cooker method. It's been proven that that simple method actually achieves perfect decarboxylation. So there's something else. I mean, the cannabinoids all vaporize off these extracts. They start vaporizing off, I think, at 308 degrees Fahrenheit. And by the time you hit 390 degrees Fahrenheit, all the different cannabinoids had vaporized off. So there's something happening during this vaporizing process. And the fact, too, that where I was using different oils, you see, I would vaporize one type of oil, and it would a layer of these cannabinoids would form on the inside of the bottle, and then another type of oil, and another layer would form, and then they all mixed together. But I mean, I was just truly astounded. But for 2 or 3 years, I didn't say much about this because a lady in the U.S. who had cured her Crohn's disease, Shauna Banda, she was vaporizing, and she was taking the oil off a vaporizer. But they said that her oils tested in around 80% THC. Well, my oils tested even higher. Mine were up in the 90% range. So that kind of fooled me. And then I stumbled onto the fact a while later that Shauna was actually, she was putting bud in the vaporizer. And she was vaporizing the cannabinoids off the bud. But you see, I was putting high-grade oil in the vaporizer. So for some reason, it made a very radical difference. And I would have to say, from the smoking aspect or even the medicinal aspect of this super oil that I call it, I would say it's 4 to 5 times more powerful than even the best extracts that I ever produced.
With the skin cancer, I was listening to a podcast a while ago now, a couple of years ago, with Tommy Chong of Cheech and Chong fame. Mm-hmm. He was using cannabis oil at the time. He had some sort of cancer. He went to the doctor, and the doctor said, well, the cancer that you've got, we normally wouldn't even tell you that you've got it, because at your age, you're probably going to die of something else before this one kicks in. But he says, all right, fair enough, I'm going to use the cannabis oil anyway, just to see if it has an effect. And he was pretty much cancer-free the last time I heard him talk. But he was also talking about a guy that he knew who went to the doctor with a skin cancer. And he said, all right, we're going to give you conventional treatment, we're going to cut it off. He had a skin cancer on the side of his head. So we're going to cut it off, and we're going to give you chemo or whatever. Okay, so he goes away from the doctor and waits for the next appointment. But within that time, he looked up cannabis oil, and he rubbed it on his head, and the skin cancer disappeared in the time between the appointments. So he goes back to the doctor for the appointment. The doctor's like, well, where's the skin cancer gone? And he said, well, I used this cannabis oil. Oh, I don't want to know. He said, well, do you not want to know because it's actually cured it? No, get out of my office.
Oh yeah, I mean, some doctors have even called the police. Patients have gone in and showed the doctors that that whatever was wrong with them was now gone, and the doctor would get so mad. This doesn't happen all the time, but in some cases, doctors will get so mad they'll call the police on them. You know, it's truly pathetic. I mean, these people are supposed to be there to heal us and help us. But, I mean, why would any doctor get mad because you healed yourself? That kind of tells you something.
Well, the patient was basically saying, do you not want to know about it? Because everybody else might want to use this treatment who's had the same thing. No, I don't want to hear.
Well, this is what I said in the beginning. I know a doctor called me from the U.S. one time. This was back about 2006. And he said, I've just been over your website. And he said, can I ask you something? He said, why did you put that up there? And I said, well, the way I look at it, when every second person knows how to cure their own cancer, I said, I don't think any system can stand against it. And he started laughing, and he said, you know, Rick, he said, years ago, my mother was dying with cancer, and I'm a doctor, and he said, they gave her 3 months to live. And he said, so I turned to the plants. And he said, unfortunately, I didn't turn to cannabis. But he said, using plant extracts, I kept her alive for over 6 years. And he said, so I seen the power in the plants. But he said, the problem right now is, you know, that I have cancer myself. And so I told him, stepped him through it, told him the whole thing, how to make the oil and everything. And so that's what he did the very next day. And then he called me back about 2 months later, and laughing like hell. He said, I'm cancer-free, Rick. He said, this oil is just beyond amazing. But the state he was in, there was a lot of restrictions. So he said, I'm going to try to treat people quietly and build up a database, you know, on the healing power of this plant. But unfortunately, I never heard another thing from him, so I don't know what happened.
Wow.
But there are a great number of doctors now jumping the fence. They see this coming. You know, cannabinoids are going to be the new face of medicine. And the doctors that are even half-wise, you know, they're jumping the fence. You know, they want to be on the right side of things when this all comes about. Again, like I said, I'm not blaming the doctors so much, you know, because they are regulated to death. But still, the common sense factor should kick in. You know, I'm giving a person, you know, something that I know is deadly poison. And yet, you know, I'm a doctor. You know, what right do I have to do this? You know, to me, this is basically legalized murder. And as a matter of fact, I've always said, you know, like, you know, Hitler had his death camps, but the society we've evolved into, we've turned Hitler's death camps into hospitals. And, you know, these infections now, people get in hospitals. One thing I should mention, too, there's a horrible condition called flesh-eating disease. And if you get that, they normally you get it on the leg or something, they just lob off your leg as quickly as possible. Because this is a very virulent, it spreads throughout the body very quickly. But here, quite some time ago, they've used the extracts on flesh-eating disease, and it brought it under control and stopped it. So, it's like I said, this is the ultimate medicine.
Sure is.
Yeah.
Go on, Andy.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say that really parallels my own situation very close, Rick, in that I got a spinal injury when I was 19. I've been taking the maximum dose I was allowed of morphine for nearly 10 years.
Oh, God.
And I did ask my general practitioner if he could possibly get me a prescription for cannabis because I knew it was being trialled in this country. Mm-hmm. And he said, I know damn well if I got you that, it would cure all your problems in one fell swoop. But he said, unfortunately, I'm not allowed to do that. And within weeks, he was gone from that practice. I've never seen him since. So they may be weeding out.
Oh, God. Yeah. Well, it's like I said, the doctors, you know, they're ostracized. You know, they'll yank their medical license. And it's the same thing, too, when you look at all of these scientists and researchers. I mean, they all knew about the Medical School of Virginia study. You know, and I was quite upset with these people, you know, when I figured this all out myself. You know, so, you know, why wasn't it them that brought this forward instead of me? You know, a guy with no medical background and a grade 8 education. But then I realized that, you know, if they had opened their, I mean, they sat there, they took their research grants, and they continued on. But if they had opened their mouths, then they would have been ostracized, and their careers would have been ruined. And, you know, I've got to know some of these top experts, and they're very nice people, and very honest, but, you know, to stand up, you know, I really didn't, see, in 2003, I didn't really know what I was getting into. You know, at that time, I knew that they'd been producing extracts from the cannabis plant for decades. So I just thought that there had to be many other people on the planet, you know, using it the same way I was. So I really thought that, you know, that I'd have lots of company. But after I started making noise about this, within a few months, I suddenly realized that, you know, I was all alone. And if the pharmaceutical industry had been smart then, they probably would have come and put a bullet in my head. But I do believe that they just thought eventually I'd go away, but that's not what happened. So, and I have no regrets about it. I mean, we have to start living in a world that makes some sense. And the only way we can have that is, we have to act on truth, not a bunch of, propaganda and lies. And any time a law or act or statute is put in place, it's got to be based on reality, not on somebody's damn profit margins. And this is what's wrong with our world today. Corruption is rampant everywhere you look. And we all know that corruption is a crime against us all. But yet we sit there, we know our governments are corrupt, we know the police and basically everything around us. So why do we put up with this? We're paying their damn salaries. I think it's time that we demanded some action and, and get, like I said, get the human race back on the right track, because we just can't go on like this. We need to get rid of the corruption, and we need to get rid of these big money people that have been manipulating us for so long.
That's what we're here trying to do every single day at peoplesinternetradio.com. There's shows going out exposing different areas of a massive amount of corruption that is going on, and we're looking for solutions to those problems. You've been unbelievable here tonight, Rick. We've got so much here more that we can talk about. I am really hoping that we can do this again and that we'll have a private chat in between. But I think we're going to have to wrap it up pretty shortly, because we've got the awesome Martin Farrell following on at 9 o'clock. Mm-hmm. And after that tonight we've got the Dark Side of the Room with Uniquely. But I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything there to Rick, but I'm really grateful that you joined us tonight.
Thank you very much, Rick. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. We've been looking forward to this for a couple of weeks.
Well, I would encourage anyone out there that has medical problems, simply go to my website, phoenixtears.ca. We put all kinds of new information up there, and basically what's on that website should answer any questions, the public might have. I have 2 books out there in this subject, and that's really all that carries me on in this crusade. And every cent that comes in from book sales, they go right back, into this cause. So, the books are there if people would like to read about, what I went through. It's a very ugly story, but it does expose, people to, what the corruption of the world that we live in. And this is something we all have to come to understand, I believe. So any support that people can give, I would certainly appreciate it. And I really enjoyed doing this show with you, with you people. It's been wonderful. And it's shows like this that make the difference. I'm really pleased, that you got in touch with me, and, People's Internet Radio has my vote.
Thank you very much, Rick. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And if I could just sneak in for a moment there, I'd like to say that we'll be back on tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m. when we'll be joined by Mickey Summers, and if time allows, we'll be joined by Tracy Morris, who's an incredibly brave lady who's been fighting injustices throughout the country, but particularly in Northern Ireland, and has got herself into a lot of hot water. And also on our Spreaker channel on Sunday, we'll be back with the monthly visit from Sarah Goodley.
Just before I go, please check out the Facebook page. It's Enemy Within Radio, all one word. If you're searching, it's best to search enemy_within. It's at Enemy Within Talk on Twitter, and it's www.enemywithinradio.com. I'll hand over to Tony to play us out with a tune, and thank you once again to Rick.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. And thanks to everybody there listening. Excellent in the chat room there. Brilliant stuff. Cheers, everyone.